They say the earth forgets, but sometimes it remembers in rust and ink and broken promises. A dog named Tater Tot dug up more than just a time capsule. He unearthed a warning Arthur Linwood had tried to forget, buried by children who once believed their teacher could save the world. And one of them had written him a letter. The morning light spilled gold across the cracked walkway, pooling in the crevices like forgotten memories. Arthur Linwood stood on the back porch of his modest home in Carson City, Nevada, cradling a chipped mug that once belonged to his late wife. The air was still cool, desert cool, and quiet enough to hear the scrape of claws in the dirt before he saw the dog. Tater Tot, he called, not unkindly. "What are you digging now?" The scruffy mutt paused mid-scratch, muzzle dirt smeared, one floppy ear stuck sideways like a broken weather vane. His stubby tail wagged once defiant and proud before he resumed his assault on the sun-baked earth under the apricot tree. Arthur sighed. He had adopted Tater Tot 6 months ago from a rescue just north of town, a place run by a retired rodeo clown and his wife. The dog was part terrier, part mystery, all mischief. About 30 pounds of wiry stubbornness, a white blaze across his face, and a patch of brindle that covered one eye like a pirate's mark. He had a pronounced underbite and a gait that leaned left, like the world was not quite level under his paws. But he was Arthur's constant now, the first to greet him in the morning, the last to fall asleep by his feet. Still, the digging. Arthur stepped down from the porch with the careful rhythm of 74-year-old knees, setting his mug on the top step. "Come on now. We have talked about this." But Tater Tot let out a low woof and kept at it, the claws scraping against something that was not soil, that got Arthur's attention. By the time he reached the dog, a rusted corner of metal had emerged from the loose dirt. Tater Tot sat back on his haunches, panting triumphantly. It was not a bone this time. Arthur crouched slowly and brushed the soil away with his gnarled hands. The object was a rectangular tin, about the size of a shoebox, pitted and corroded at the seams. He turned it over gently. The faded remnants of duct tape were still visible, with a peeling label scrawled in Sharpie. Randall's 5th grade 1987. Do not open until 2020. Arthur's breath caught. He stared at the writing, the familiar loop of a child's hand in the D, the way the year was underlined 3 times. He knew this box. He remembered the day they would buried it. April 3rd, 1987. Behind the school, under the cover of the apricot tree, this very tree, which had since crept into his own backyard after the schoolyard fence had been moved for housing developments in the 90s. His students had written letters to the future. They were drawn pictures, added photos, scribbled predictions about flying cars and robot teachers. It was a science class project, a fun one, meant to inspire, but there had been a shadow hanging over that spring. Arthur's wife, Meredith, had just been diagnosed, and though he would kept teaching for 2 more years after, that particular class, the class of 87, was the last one he would felt truly connected to. They would left something in the ground, and now his dog had brought it back. He sat in the dirt beside Tater Tot, heart knocking. "Look what you found, old boy," he whispered. He carried the capsule inside, setting it on the worn kitchen table where he used to grade papers by lamplight. Tater Tot followed, nails clacking on the tile. Arthur fetched a screwdriver from the junk drawer. The lid protested, but eventually gave way with a metallic groan. Inside, time had done its work. Paper yellowed, the scent of rust and dust, and something else, hope, maybe, or memory. The first thing he saw was a Polaroid. 11 kids, arms draped over each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the oblivious confidence of 10-year-olds. He could name every face. Emily Tsay, who used to build solar ovens out of pizza boxes. DeMarcus Howell, always sketching dolphins and rainforests. Jonah Beck, the class clown who cried when they learned about melting ice caps. And behind them, on the far right, stood a younger Arthur Linwood, thick brown beard, glasses slightly askew, corduroy blazer. Smiling, he swallowed hard. Beneath the photo were the letters, some folded neatly, others decorated with stickers or childlike doodles, and one tucked between two pieces of laminated construction paper was addressed in faded pencil. To Mer Linwood, please read in the future. Arthur stared at it. His hand trembled as he unfolded the page. The handwriting was careful, too careful, blocky and slow, as though the writer had wanted every word to matter. Dear Mer Linwood, if you are reading this, then I guess it worked. I mean the capsule, not the world. I do not know if we made it, if the planet's okay, or if we are still hurting it. I'm just a kid, but I remember what you said, that we do not have to fix everything, but we have to care, we have to try. You made me feel like maybe I could help change something. Maybe we all could. So I am asking you, in the future, please do not forget what you taught us. We were listening. I swear we were. I hope you still believe in us. Tessa Bruntley, age 10. Arthur stared at the letter until the words blurred. Tater Tot rested his chin on Arthur's slipper. He had not thought about Tessa Bruntley in decades. Quiet girl. Braided hair. She would have been the first to volunteer to read Rachel Carson aloud in class. He remembered her voice, soft but steady. And she would written to him. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, the wind stirred the apricot tree. Arthur looked around his home. It had grown too quiet since Meredith passed. The garden had gone to seed. The local high school no longer called for guest lectures. No more nights, no more science fairs, just creaky floorboards and reruns on a dusty TV. And now this. He folded the letter carefully, then looked at the dog watching him with tilted head curiosity. Well, Tater, he said, what do we do with this? Tatot let out a sneeze, then padded over and nudged the letter with his nose. Arthur chuckled once dry and low. Then he looked toward the window, where the town library's green awning fluttered across the street. A breeze blew through the cracked pane, the scent of sage and memory. He stood slowly, the letter still in hand. But he did not notice the bottom of the capsule, where something else had been buried. A small red notebook. Its spine mold damaged, but its contents still intact, and inside it, in pages no one had meant to read again, was a secret Arthur Linwood had forgotten he shared. Part 2: The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. Arthur Linwood held the red notebook like it was something alive. Its cover was blistered from years underground, the cardboard warped and damp to the touch. Tater Tot sat on his haunches by the kitchen table, watching with the patient curiosity only dogs seemed to master, like he knew this moment mattered. Arthur ran a careful thumb along the spine. He did not remember red notebook. The capsule was meant to be for the kids, not him. but something about it tugged at his memory distant, like a voice from the back row of a classroom 30 years gone. He opened the cover. The first page was blank, the corners curled and browned. The second held a title written in shaky ink. To whom it may concern if this world is still turning. His breath caught. The handwriting was his. Younger, but unmistakably his. Arthur Reed. April 3rd, 1987. I do not know if this is foolish or hopeful. Maybe both. My students are writing letters to the future, stuffing the box with jokes and predictions and crayon rainbows. But I woke up this morning with something clenched in my chest, something heavier than lesson plans. So I am writing this, not as Linwood the teacher, but as Arthur the man who does not know what kind of world you are standing in right now. I am afraid we have waited too long to change. Afraid we have taught children how the world works, but not how to save it. If you are reading this, please tell me I was wrong. Please tell me we figured it out. Arthur set the notebook down. His throat ached in that quiet, unnameable way that comes when you have just remembered who you used to be. Tater Tot gave a small whine and pawed at Arthur's slipper. Arthur did not respond right away. He was back in that classroom now, with green linoleum floors and pulled-down maps of the ozone layer, pointing to the smudged drawing of a polar bear clinging to a melting iceberg. The kids had looked up at him like he knew something, like he could fix it. He had believed back then that maybe education could be a kind of salvation. But the years rolled on, the headlines got louder, the oceans warmer, and Arthur had grown tired. Then Meredith got sick. Then she was gone. He had stopped trying. And worse, he had stopped caring. But now this letter, this notebook, this scruffy little dog with the name of a potato snack, had put the past quite literally at his feet. Arthur stood up. The next morning, he walked across the street to the library. The Carson City Public Library was not much, just one-story brick with a creaky front door and a front desk, always covered in bookmarks and hand sanitizer. But it had survived budget cuts, snowstorms, and 3 different head librarians. It would probably survive the end of the world. The current librarian, Janet Merriweather, was in her 60s with steel-colored hair pulled into a bun so tight it could hold secrets. She squinted over her glasses as Arthur approached the desk. "Tater Tot, can tea come in?" she said without looking up. "He is part of the presentation." Arthur replied, brushing dirt off his windbreaker. She raised an eyebrow. "What presentation?" "The one I am about to give." Janet stared at him for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "Go on." So he told her about the time capsule, about the letters, about Tessa Brantley's note and the red notebook, and the way he had not felt like a teacher, not really, in over 3 decades. Janet listened, the sharpness in her eyes softening as he spoke. "I want to start a weekly class," he said, "not just for kids. For anyone. Science without the doom. Facts without the fear. Solutions. Hope. Stories. Tater Tot can be the assistant." The dog sneezed emphatically as if on cue. Janet folded her hands. "We have got a small community room on Wednesdays at 10. No dogs unless he behaves." Arthur nodded. "He listens better than most kids I have taught." "Fine," she said. "You have got 1 week. Impress me." That afternoon, Arthur pulled out the old easel from the garage and wiped down a cracked whiteboard. Tater-tot napped in the sun beside the sliding door, tail twitching in some hopeful dream. Arthur wrote on the board in thick green marker, Wonder Wednesdays with Myrrh, Linwood and Tater-tot. Topic hash. The future is not a lost cause. He stared at the words. It felt too big, too soon. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. He walked back into the kitchen and picked up the red notebook. There were more pages to read. Memories he had buried. Confessions he had forgotten. He was not sure he was ready to revisit all of it. But he owed it to that young man with the uncertain handwriting and the students who had believed in him. Arthur thumbed to the next page. April 4th, 1987. Today a student asked me if the world would still have trees when she was a grandma. I told her yes, but I was not sure I believed it. Is that the real danger? That we stop believing the good we teach? Meredith said once, before the diagnosis, that the worst thing we can do to the future is lose faith in it. Maybe this little red book is my way of keeping faith. Even if nobody ever reads it. Arthur closed the notebook. He looked over at Tater-tot, who was now awake and chewing one of his own paws with the intensity of a dog unraveling a mystery. Buddy, Arthur said softly, what have you gotten us into? Tater-tot trotted over, dropped a piece of sock at Arthur's feet, and wagged. Arthur smiled. For the first time in years, he felt something stir behind his ribs. Not grief, not guilt. Purpose, and in the distance, just faint enough to question whether he imagined it. He thought he heard the soft voices of children from long ago laughing, learning, believing. Part 3. The dog who dug up the time capsule. Wednesdays used to mean coffee at sunrise and long, silent afternoons. Since Meredith passed, Arthur Linwood had stopped marking time with much intention. But now, Wednesday held a different kind of gravity. He wore his old corduroy blazer to the first Wonder Wednesday. The elbows were worn pale, and a button near the cuff was missing. Meredith had sewn a tiny acorn on the inside lining her little joke from the year he tried to grow oak trees in the desert clay. He touched it once, for luck, then called for the dog. Tater-tot, he said. Showtime. The dog emerged from under the couch carrying a squeaky cactus in his mouth. His stubby tail wagged hard enough to shake his hind legs. Arthur tied a blue bandana around his neck, faded, but clean, and clipped on the leash. Outside, the Nevada sun already burned bright against the sidewalk. Carson City had woken up, sprinklers ticking, distant lawnmowers humming, kids biking past on cracked pavement. They crossed the street slowly. Arthur walked a little straighter than usual. Inside the library's community room, a dozen folding chairs formed a messy circle. A dry erase board leaned against the wall with the words he would scrawled the day before. Wonder Wednesdays. The future is not a lost cause. With Myrrh, Linwood and Tater-tot. He had not expected anyone to come, but by 10:03, 5 people had wandered in. A teenage girl with a buzz cut and a Green Day shirt. A retired couple Arthur vaguely recognized from the farmer's market. A middle-aged man with oil-stained hands and tired eyes. And one girl 8 or 9 clutching a spiral notebook and a Tater-tot keychain that looked homemade. Arthur blinked, then smiled. He cleared his throat. Good morning, everyone. I'm Arthur. This is Tater-tot, my 4-legged co-teacher. Tater-tot sneezed. The little girl giggled. Arthur gestured to the whiteboard. I used to teach science, mostly fifth graders. This dog dug up a time capsule a few weeks ago. And well, let us just say it reminded me that maybe I was not quite done teaching. He told them about the capsule, about the letters and the photo, about Tessa Brantley's note, about the red notebook, and the guilt he had not realized he still carried. Then he paused. What I want to do here is not just talk about climate change or melting glaciers. You have heard all that. What I want is for this to be about wonder, about remembering what we loved before we were afraid of losing it. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small glass jar filled with sand, shells, and a piece of bleached coral. Anyone ever been to the ocean? He asked. The older man nodded. San Pedro. Used to fish there before they closed it off. Arthur passed the jar around. This came from a beach in Oregon. Meredith and I used to camp there every summer. Now there is a seawall where our tent used to go. The room was quiet. Wonder begins with memory, he said, and action begins with wonder. Tater Tot let out a groan and flopped dramatically onto his side. The girl in the front row scribbled something in her notebook. Arthur caught a glimpse of the page. We can still try. After the session, the girl lingered. You really taught fifth grade? She asked. Arthur nodded. For 34 years. I'm in fourth. She pointed at the keychain. I named him after your dog before I met him. I saw the poster outside. Arthur chuckled. Then it must be fate. She shifted her weight. Can I help next week? Like, set up the chairs or something? Arthur hesitated, then offered his hand. You have got yourself a job, Miss Lena Brantley. His heart stuttered. Brantley. He studied her face again, the wide-set eyes, the shape of her chin. Lena, he said slowly, any chance you are related to Tessa Brantley? She nodded. My mom. Arthur smiled so wide it made his eyes sting. Because she wrote me a letter 37 years ago, and it helped me remember who I was. Lena's eyes lit up. She is gonna freak out. She loves telling me about you. She said you had this beard that made you look like a wizard. Arthur laughed. She was not wrong. Tater Tot trotted over and nosed Lena's hand. She scratched behind his ears like she would known him forever, and in that quiet library room, something settled into place, like a puzzle piece that had been buried for decades. That evening, Arthur sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea and the red notebook open in front of him. He flipped to a page marked, with a pressed leaf, April 10th, 1987. Sometimes I wonder if teaching matters. You can pour your whole life into people and never know if any of it sticks. But today, Tessa asked if I thought the planet had a favorite color. I said maybe blue. She said it used to be green. I do not think I will ever forget that. Arthur closed the notebook gently. Then he looked at Tater Tot, who lay curled up on the floor with one ear twitching. You are some dog, Arthur said softly. You did not just dig up a box, you dug up a second chance. And for the first time in years, Arthur Linwood began to plan for the future. Part 4, The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. By the third Wonder Wednesday, they had to set up extra chairs. A local reporter had written a half-page article titled Retired Teacher and Dog Revive Lessons from a Buried Past. A few neighbors came out of curiosity. Then their neighbors did. Then parents started bringing kids, saying they were tired of screen time and scary headlines. Arthur Linwood stood at the front of the room. Blazer sleeves rolled to the elbow. a dog-eared National Geographic in one hand and a cracked globe in the other. Tater Tot sat beside him on a donated bath mat someone had labeled Professor Paw. Today, Arthur began. We are talking about migration animal, human, and otherwise. He spun the globe once, letting the sound fill the silence. Everything on this planet moves. He continued, and when the world warms, it moves faster. Monarch butterflies fly thousands of miles on wings like tissue paper. Whales echo through oceans that change beneath them. And some people, too many, move not because they want to, but because they have to. He paused. A woman near the back dabbed her eyes. Arthur pointed to a large hand-drawn map taped to the wall. Red threads stretched between continents and coastlines. I want you to think of a place you would miss if it disappeared. Not the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone, something personal. A tree. A trail. Your grandmother's porch swing. Write it down. We are building something. Tater Tot barked once, startling a toddler who then giggled and clapped. Lena Brantley, sitting cross-legged up front, raised her hand. What if we do not know yet? What if we have not been anywhere? Arthur smiled. Then wonder about it. Pick a place you would want to know. That counts too. Later, as folks lingered and helped stack chairs, Arthur sat on the floor to rest his knees. Lena came over, carrying a small paper heart with something written in glitter pen. She placed it in his lap. My future treehouse, where I will read and nobody will yell. Arthur blinked against the sting in his eyes. That is a good place to protect. She shrugged. I do not think it exists yet. Then we better make sure the world sticks around long enough for you to build it. She grinned, then scratched Tater Tot's belly. I told Mom about you. Lena said, more quietly, about the letter she wrote. She wants to come next week. Arthur's heart ticked unevenly. I would like that. Very much. The next morning, the doorbell rang just as Arthur was steeping his tea. Standing on the porch was a woman in her 40s. Denim jacket, crow's feet, and something familiar in the set of her mouth. Linwood? She asked. He smiled. Tessa Brantley. She stepped forward and hugged him before he could say another word. It has been over 30 years, she said when they sat, but I have never forgotten that class. You brought in snow in a cooler one time, just so we could talk about glaciers. Arthur laughed. That cooler gave out halfway through the lesson. I think DeMarcus used it as a footrest. She chuckled. And you let us write letters to the future. I remember that day clear as glass. He reached into the cabinet and brought down a small tin box. Her breath caught. You still have it? Your daughter S-Dog dug it up. Tessa looked at him, stunned. Arthur passed her the letter, the one she would written in pencil, addressed to him. She held it in both hands, and for a long while, she did not speak. I did not think anyone would ever read this. She whispered, You asked me to remember what I taught you. Arthur said. It worked. She looked at him, misty-eyed, and I meant every word. That night, Arthur returned to the red notebook. He turned to a page dated May 2nd, 1987. The ink had faded, but the message was clear. May 2nd, 1987. Meredith S. treatment is not working. I taught photosynthesis today while pretending the world was not shrinking. I keep telling the kids to plant trees. But what happens when hope feels like fiction? I can say these things aloud, but I think I believe them less when I write them down. I wonder if that is what saving the world looks like, doing the hard thing, even when you have stopped believing in it. Arthur stared at the page for a long time. Tater Tot climbed onto the chair beside him, awkward and determined, and rested his chin on Arthur's arm. I stopped trying after she died, Arthur murmured. But you shaggy little potato, you reminded me that trying matters. Tater Tot sighed, warm breath against Arthur's sleeve. And in that moment, the old man and the dog sat together beneath the low kitchen light, surrounded by letters from the past and the fragile hope of tomorrow. Part 5: The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. The first dust storm of the season swept through Carson City the following Monday. It rattled the windows of the Linwood home, tossing leaves against the glass like thrown cards. Arthur sat by the window, red notebook open, watching Tater Tot snooze belly up near the heater vent. The little dog's hind leg twitched in a dream, chasing something only he could see. Arthur turned back to the page he would marked the night before. A passage from late 1987, written in his own shaky hand. October 29th, 1987. Meredith can taste much anymore, but she still wants tea every morning. She said today, I do not need to believe the world will be saved. Arthur, I just need to know someone's still trying. I think I wrote that on the blackboard the next day, but I erased it before the bell rang. The heater kicked on with a click. Arthur traced the faded ink with a fingertip, hearing her voice in his head, soft, full of fight even at the end. I am still trying, he whispered aloud, to no one in particular. The wind howled outside. At the next Wonder Wednesday, the room was full before the clock hit 10. Tessa Brantley stood at the back, arms folded, proud. Lina had brought 3 friends. One of the regulars, a plumber named Raymond, had printed flyers on bright green paper. The top read, Hope is renewable. Arthur opened that week's lesson with a mason jar full of seeds. He held it up. Inside this jar is 1,000 trees, 1,000 forests, all in waiting. He passed the jar around. Most of what a seed needs is already in it. He continued, a little time, a little water, some faith, and sometimes someone willing to plant it. He wrote one word on the board in his firm. Teachers print. Legacy. What we leave behind, he said. Not just what we taught, but what we kept teaching even when it got hard. Tater Tot sneezed once, then sat politely beside Arthur's feet. Arthur smiled. And sometimes the ones who carry our legacy do not look like students. They look like dogs. Laughter rippled through the room. Afterward, as people filed out with seed packets in hand, Tessa stayed behind. You know, she said, running her fingers along the spines of the library books. I did not go into science. I wanted, but I did not think I was smart enough or brave enough. Arthur shook his head. Bravery is not loud. Sometimes it is a whisper you listen to 30 years later. Tessa looked down. I am listening now. He reached into his satchel and handed her a photocopy of her letter, the one she would written to him as a child. I think this still matters, he said, maybe more now than ever. She took it with both hands, her eyes glassy. My daughter's watching me, she said. I want her to know I still believe. That evening, Arthur sat on his porch with Tater Tot curled beside him. The storm had passed. The air smelled like sage and wet asphalt. He sipped tea from the same mug Meredith used to use, and watched the sky fold into shades of bruise and gold. Across the street, the library's windows still glowed soft yellow. Inside, Janet Merriweather was updating the whiteboard. Next week's topic, what if the ice still melts? With special guest Tessa Bruntley. Arthur chuckled under his breath. She is not a scientist, he said to Tater Tot. But maybe she does not need to be. The dog thumped his tail once and burrowed deeper into the blanket across Arthur's lap. Arthur looked down at the dog and whispered, I think you might be saved more than just a box. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the kind of peace that comes when you have started doing what you were meant to do all along, even if it took you a lifetime to remember how. Part 6. The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. The first frost came early that year. Carson City awoke beneath a silver veil grass, stiff with crystals. Parked cars dusted white. Arthur Linwood stepped outside in his heavy flannel, steam rising from his mug, breath puffing in front of him like smoke signals from another time. Tater Tot bounded across the yard, leaving a scatter of paw prints in the frozen lawn like some joyful, clumsy ghost. Arthur crouched slowly beside the garden bed. He had planted marigolds there last spring, just to see if anything would still bloom. The frost had taken them overnight, their orange petals curled in on themselves like tiny, forgotten hands. He touched one gently. Even the stubborn ones do not last forever. Tater Tot padded up and dropped something at Arthur's feet. A stick, short, smooth, and familiar. Arthur picked it up. A memory stirred. This was the pointer stick he used in his classroom back when blackboards were still black and students still passed notes on paper. He must be left it out in the garage after retiring. The dog must be found it. Is this your way of saying I should keep teaching? He asked. Tater Tot sneezed, then yawned. Thought so. The following Wednesday's session drew the largest crowd yet. The community room had been rearranged into clusters of chairs around tables. At the center of each table was a single ice cube in a clear bowl. Arthur stood beside a globe, whiteboard behind him. Tater Tot curled under librarian's desk like a sentinel. Today's question, Arthur said, holding up a glass of water, is not if the ice melts, but then what? He moved slowly between the groups. We always frame climate change like a warning, he said, but what if we framed it like a story in progress? He turned the globe, pausing his finger on the Arctic. See this? He said. This is where the sea ice is vanishing. But over here, he spun to the South Pacific, communities are learning to grow floating gardens. In Alaska, scientists are working with indigenous elders to track animal migrations. The world is not ending. It is changing, and we still get to decide how. From the back, someone called out, but is not it too late? Arthur paused. I used to think so, he said. I stopped believing for a while. After my wife died, I could not find the point in anything not science, not memory. I let the fear win. He looked down at Tater Tot. Then this dog dug up a box of letters I would forgotten. One of them was from a girl who asked me not to forget what I taught. And I realized he turned back to the room, that fear can be the last thing we leave behind. After the session, Lina pulled Arthur aside. She held up her spiral notebook, open to a new page. At the top, she had written, the Tater Tot plan, what one kid can still do. Underneath were hand-drawn boxes labeled, pick up trash every Friday, write letters to the mayor about trees, Start a no idling sign at school. Drop off. Plant wildflowers behind the library. Arthur blinked hard. That is one heck of a plan. Lena grinned. Want to help me plant the flowers? Absolutely. That Saturday, under a blue sky scrubbed clean by wind, Arthur knelt beside Lena behind the library. The ground was dry and reluctant, but not hopeless. They pushed seeds into the dirt black-eyed Susans. Purple coneflowers, milkweed, and watered the earth gently, like a whisper. Tessa stood nearby with mugs of cider. She is stubborn, she said of her daughter. Arthur chuckled. It runs in the family. Tater-tot, bandana crooked and nose muddied, wandered through the flower bed like a foreman inspecting work. You know, Tessa said quietly, I used to think the most I could do was recycle and vote. But lately, I am thinking legacy is smaller than that. Closer, quieter. Arthur nodded. It is a seed in the ground, a hand on a shoulder, a story that keeps being told. He looked at the dog pawing at the soil, nose twitching with purpose. Or maybe it is a mutt digging up the truth you buried for too long. That night, Arthur returned to the red notebook. He flipped to one of the final entries, written in a script more hurried, almost desperate. December 12th, 1987. Meredith is sleeping more now. Some days she can't remember the seasons. I told my students today that a glacier does not collapse all at once. It starts with a crack, a melt, a shift. They looked afraid. I wanted to take it back, but then Jonna said, if it cracks, we can build a bridge. Maybe that is the best we can do. Arthur closed the notebook, pressing his palm against the cover. Tater, he said softly, we have still got bridges to build. The dog whined once, then curled tighter into the crook of Arthur's chair. And outside, beneath the porch light, the freshly planted soil slept quietly, waiting to bloom. Part 7. The dog who dug up the time capsule. A week later, snow arrived like an apology. Soft, hesitant flakes drifted down over Carson City, dusting rooftops and power lines, settling gently on the apricot tree in Arthur Linwood's backyard, the same one under which a tin time capsule had slept for decades. Arthur stood at the kitchen window, watching it all in silence. In the pale morning light, the world looked clean, hushed, paused, but not forgotten. Behind him, Tater-tot spun in tight, clumsy circles on the kitchen rug before flopping dramatically beside the radiator, grumbling as only a small, scrappy dog could. Can dig in snow, huh? Arthur said, you will survive. Tater-tot groaned. Arthur returned to the table where the red notebook lay open beside a fresh cup of tea. Today's page was dated January 3rd, 1988. January 3rd, 1988. Meredith called the snowfall the hush before the bloom. She always found beauty in dormancy, even when it frightened me. I do not know what spring will look like without her, but I promised her I would keep showing up for the kids, even when I feel like a fraud, even when my hands shake holding the chalk. She said, Arthur, the world won't remember your lectures, but it might remember your kindness. I hope she is right. He ran a hand over the yellowing page, then turned toward the chair by the heater. Tater, he said, let us go visit the future. The dog sat up instantly, head cocked, tail wagging like a broken metronome. That afternoon, The library's community room was packed again. The windows fogged from the body heat of bundled neighbors. Gloves stuffed in coat pockets, cheeks pink from cold. A thermos of hot cider steamed near the back. Children peeled off mittens, excited to see what Professor Poor had in store. Janet, the librarian, had to ask twice for quiet. Arthur stepped forward with Tater Tot beside him, the dog now outfitted in a sweater knitted by a woman who'd come to every session since the second week. Across the front it read, "Wonder Dog." Laughter bubbled as Tater Tot strutted to his spot on the bath mat. Arthur held up a glass mason jar, filled with small objects. A torn bus pass, a bottle cap, a stone shaped like a heart, a dried leaf, a toy dinosaur. "This," he said, "is our new time capsule." People leaned forward. "I want everyone young, old, tired, hopeful to write down one thing you believe is worth remembering. Something you love. Something you want someone to find, even if you are not around anymore." He passed out cards. "Not because the world is ending," Arthur said, "but because someone, someday, might need a reason to begin again." For the next hour, the room buzzed with quiet thought. A boy wrote, "My mom is singing when she thinks no one hears." A teenager scrawled that the lake used to freeze deep enough to skate on. Lena wrote, "Books that smell like old trees." Even Janet scribbled something down and folded it tight. Arthur added his own card last. Then, with the care of a ritual, they placed the items into the jar, sealed the lid, and labeled it, "To whomever still cares, do not open until 2050. And then, without fanfare, Arthur handed it to Lena. "You choose the spot," he said. "You are the future now." Later that night, Arthur and Tater Tot returned home through the snow, the dog bounding in and out of drifts like a pup half his age. Inside, Arthur peeled off his boots, poured his tea, and opened the red notebook to a fresh page. For the first time in 37 years, he picked up a pen and began to write. December 14th, 2024. Today I taught again. Not in a school, not with chalk or test scores, but with stories and seed jars and a dog named after a snack food. They listened. They still listen. Meredith was right. The world may forget our lectures, but it remembers our kindness, our wonder, our belief that things can be better. I do not know how long I have left, but I am not done planting. Not yet. Tater Tot nudged Arthur's elbow, then dropped a plush cactus in his lap. "Even now?" Arthur asked. Smiling, "You want to play?" The dog barked softly, then curled against his side. Arthur stared out the window. The apricot tree was heavy with snow, but beneath the white, somewhere deep in the roots, the earth was still holding spring. Part 8. The dog who dug up the time capsule. The new year arrived not with fireworks, but with wind, gusting across Nevada's winter plains. It rattled the shingles on Arthur Linwood's roof and whistled down the chimney like a visitor looking for warmth. Inside, the house smelled of split pine and the soup Arthur had been simmering all afternoon. Tater Tot dozed beneath the kitchen table, twitching in sleep, his paw resting lightly against the leg of Arthur's chair, as if he did not trust the old man to stay put. Arthur gently folded the red notebook closed. He would been rereading his most recent entry, the one he would written just days ago. After the time capsule ceremony at the library, he touched the spine of the book like it was a hand. A tether. A bridge. On the back porch, a small wooden sign had just been staked into the ground by Lena and her friends. The letters were painted in blue acrylic, a little crooked but proud. Tater Tot Garden, things we want to keep. Underneath, they would planted the first round of wildflowers. Even in the snow, even in January, Arthur believed something had already begun to bloom. 2 weeks later, Arthur found himself sitting in the Carson City mayor's office. He had not planned on becoming any kind of public figure. He did not like microphones. He did not trust politics. And he certainly did not believe a retired science teacher with a bum, hip, and a scruffy dog should be making speeches. But someone had nominated him for a local environmental initiative award. They would ask him to give a 5-minute talk, and he would said yes. Here he was, knees stiff in a borrowed suit, Tater Tot sitting at his feet wearing a clip-on tie. The mayor, a tall woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense bob, smiled from behind her desk. Linwood, we have had quite a few letters about your program. The library says attendance has tripled. Anne, apparently, there is now a dog reading club. Arthur chuckled. Only for very patient dogs. She leaned forward. I would like to expand what you are doing. Fund some weekend events. Maybe get the schools involved. Field trips. Hands-on climate education. Arthur blinked. You want to scale up Wonder Wednesdays. Carson City needs more of what you are doing. She said, not just the facts, but the feeling, the connection. He looked down at Tater Tot, who gave a short, approving huff. I am not sure I can handle more than 1 day a week, Arthur said honestly. Then let us find others who can. She replied, let us make it a legacy. That Sunday, Arthur and Tessa Bruntley met in the back of the library. They sat on overturned paint buckets. Planning. Tessa had brought her laptop and a legal pad full of notes. I spoke with the local middle school. They are open to a satellite version of Wonder Wednesdays, call it Young Stewards Club. Lena already made a flyer. Arthur raised his brows. She says she is 10 and a half. Tater Tot trotted between them, chasing a moth made brave by the overhead light. I do not want this to become a brand. Arthur said, it is not supposed to be about me. Tessa shook her head. It is not. It is about what you reminded us, that caring does not expire, that it is never too late to try. Arthur looked down at his hands. They had grown thinner in recent years. Liver spotted. Slower, but when he curled them into fists, they still felt steady. I am not used to being seen again. He admitted, it is strange, like coming up for air and realizing you have been underwater for years. Tessa nodded. I know the feeling. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, relentless. Familiar? That night, back at home, Arthur sat beside the fireplace and opened the red notebook one more time. He flipped through pages filled with grief and uncertainty, his younger self's etching attempts to hold on to meaning, to hope. But now, at the very back, were new pages, blank. He stared at them for a long moment. Then, slowly, he picked up a pen. January 28th, 2025. Today, the mayor asked if we could take Wonder Wednesdays into the schools. Tessa says it will take volunteers. I said yes before I could think twice. Lena says we need to plant more flowers near the library sign. The old me would not have believed any of this. But that version of me is buried now somewhere beneath a frost-covered apricot tree. and in his place is someone still willing to kneel in the dirt and try again. Because maybe that is all legacy really is. Not what you leave behind, but what you choose to start, even when you know you won't see the end. Tater-tot climbed into Arthur's lap awkwardly, loyally, completely. Arthur laughed through his nose, wiped his eyes, and kept writing. Part 9: The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. By mid-February, the library's community room had been unofficially renamed the Wonder Wing. Someone hung hand-drawn banners above the door. Kids brought in shoebox dioramas of forests and shorelines. Retired mechanics sat beside high schoolers, folding seed packets and measuring rainwater. Tater-tot had his own laminated badge clipped to his bandana. Kalinko teacher. Arthur Linwood had never felt busier or more alive. His body still ached in the mornings. His knees still barked at stairs. But his days were full again. His voice, once softened by loneliness, had grown steady. He taught standing now, not from a chair, when he gestured to the globe or bent to help a child with a solar oven model. It was with the ease of a man who had remembered his place in the world. Not a prophet, not a savior, just a witness, a gardener of wonder. The weakest lesson was about memory. Arthur stood at the front of the packed room, holding a faded science textbook from the 1980s, his own copy. Pages still marked with old sticky notes and faint graphite stars. Science is how we measure change, he said, but stories are how we remember why it matters. He paused, letting the words settle. I want to show you something. He opened a small velvet box and held up a brass compass. This belonged to my wife, Meredith. She was a naturalist, hiked more trails than I ever will. When she got sick, she gave it to me, said if you ever forget which way to go, hold this. He looked out over the room, faces young and old. Strangers turned allies. Turns out, he said, voice low, I did not need it to find north. I just needed it to find people again. A hush fell over the room. Then, a voice from the back. Can we put that in the next time capsule? Arthur smiled. I am still using it. Laughter. Lightness. Tater-tot barked once, as if to punctuate the moment. After the session, as people filtered out and left behind half-empty cider cups and scraps of scribbled hope, Lynn approached. Linwood, she said, holding a clipboard that looked too big for her small hands. Can I ask you something? Of course. What happens if you are not here someday? What happens to Wonder Wednesdays? Arthur crouched beside her, slowly. Well, he said, that is why we write things down. That is why we teach, so that what matters does not stop when we do. She nodded, solemn. I think I want to be a science teacher, she said quietly. Like you. Arthur blinked hard. You would be a very good one, he said. She replied, I want to be exactly like you. That night, at home, Arthur added another entry to the red notebook. February 12th, 2025. Today a child told me she wants to be exactly like me. I wanted to say, be better, be louder, faster, wiser. But then I thought maybe being a bridge is enough. Maybe if someone crosses it, I have done my part. He closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and walked to the back door. The porch light cast long shadows over the yard. The apricot tree stood bare, but not broken. Tater-tot trotted outside, sniffing the air, then returned with something in his mouth, a curled brown leaf, impossibly intact from last fall. He dropped it at Arthur's feet. Tail wagging, Arthur picked it up. "Some things do not disappear," he whispered. "They just wait to be found again." He tucked the leaf between the pages of the red notebook and let the house fall into sleep. Part 10. The Dog Who Dug Up the Time Capsule. Spring came quietly to Carson City. One morning the apricot tree budded with pale green tips. A week later, bees hovered above the tater-tot garden, dancing between blossoms of black-eyed Susans and milkweed that had somehow survived the frost. Someone painted rocks with words like hope and still growing and placed them among the roots. Arthur Linwood stood in his backyard, hand resting on the porch rail, watching it all unfold. His hair had thinned more this year, his breath grew shorter on the stairs, but his heart beat with something steady now, a rhythm of purpose. He had found a way back. Tater-tot lay at the edge of the flowerbed, ears perked toward a bluebird on the fence. His bandana was freshly washed, and someone leaner probably had embroidered a tiny stitched compass in the corner. The library had announced a city-wide Earth Week event, and they wanted Arthur to open it. He tried to decline, gently, but Tessa had called him a coward with a grin. Lina had said, "If you do not speak, I will," and Tater-tot, as if sensing hesitation, had placed his paw on Arthur's knee and stared him down like a seasoned debate coach. So he would agreed. On the first day of Earth Week, the steps of the Carson City Civic Center were lined with folding chairs and paper banners strung between trees. Hand-painted signs read, "The future is not a lost cause. Wonder walks here. Thank you, Linwood." Arthur wore a clean shirt, his old corduroy blazer, and the brass compass tucked into his breast pocket. As he stepped up to the podium, a hush fell. Tater-tot stood beside him on a small platform someone had built from milk crates. Arthur cleared his throat. "I was never good at speeches," he said. "I preferred blackboards and quiet questions." Laughter rippled gently. He continued, "When I retired, I thought I was done teaching. I thought what I had to offer had already passed. But I was wrong." He reached into his satchel and pulled out the red notebook. This belonged to a version of me I would nearly forgotten. A man grieving, a man who had stopped believing, and a dog. He paused, looking down at Tater-tot, reminded me that nothing buried is truly gone. Not if someone's still willing to dig. A few people dabbed at their eyes. Arthur smiled softly. Legacy is not just what we leave behind. It is what we pass forward. A lesson, a kindness, a garden, a dog. He opened the notebook and read aloud from the last page. March 20th, 202. If you are reading this now, maybe you have found something I left behind. Maybe you are holding this because you needed a reason to believe again. So let me say it, just in case no one else has. It is not too late. You matter. There is still beauty worth saving. Start where you are. Dig where you stand. The roots run deeper than you think. When Arthur closed the notebook, the crowd rose to its feet in applause, and Tater-tot, unbothered, proud, barked once and wagged his tail like a punctuation mark. That night, Arthur sat beside the apricot tree with the dog curled against his side. He would buried the second time capsule that morning, this one full of new letters, photos, seed packets, and stories. A note from Lena, a toy compass, a copy of his red notebook, scanned and printed, bound with string. He placed a small plaque in front of the tree. To whomever still cares, do not open until 2075. As the sun dipped behind the Sierras, Arthur reached down and stroked Tater Tot's ears. You came into my life with muddy paws and no manners, he murmured. And somehow, you helped me unbury the best parts of myself. Tater Tot yawned, rested his chin on Arthur's shoe, and let out a deep, contented sigh. Above them, the first stars appeared, blinking softly like old promises kept, and in the warm hush of an early spring night, the world did not feel so broken after all. It felt like something still blooming, something still worth saving. The end, in memory, in wonder, in bloom.